try not to slam this then when I
That was
finish it.
so funny.
Yeah, I was so like enthused, and I was running out of spit, and I was like, I had like a second. There was like not much left in it.
Yeah, you and I haven't podcasted since, what was it? Like maybe 3 years ago at this point. It's been a bit.
Yeah, a couple like 2-3 years ago for sure.
But I get the great opportunity to talk to you every Wednesday about the documentary. So I wanted to start with that actually, Rick, because
Okay.
I'll intro you on my own here. So most people listening, if they follow the show, know that we've been working on a doc for years now. And now we have our short film ready to go. And now we're taking distributors and getting the funding and all of the adulting things that come with creating something cool. But I wanted to back up into like, why were you interested in even being a part of this in the first place? Because one of the things that I love about you is your resolve around choosing the things that you spend your time on. Because when you do, Rick, you like really do it. And so I really appreciated that. So yeah, I wanted to know like, why was this interesting for you?
Oh, that's interesting. I appreciate you kind of like reflecting that back actually, because it's something that's like become almost necessary, you know, like, well, I would say like 4.5, 5 years ago, I got out of the military to be a writer, not really knowing what that entailed. And, you know, some of the things that I'm interested in is how a vocation, which, you know, vocation comes from the Latin root of voice. So it's like a calling. Vocation is a calling. It's not a profession or a job. That's kind of the language we use in our cultural context. But this idea that a true vocation kind of like it calls you, and as it calls you, it makes demands of you, and it transforms you as you try to figure out what it would mean to live up to what's calling you. And so I appreciate you reflecting that back, because I think part of what I realized within the first, I mean, I think I'm always realizing this, but within the first few years of pursuing this vocation is that there were certain things that took away from my ability to live up to this calling, like spending hours on social media or just different things, really. But sort of culling through that and like having the courage to like let things fall away if they're not part of this thing that's calling me has actually been like a really important part of my work. And then there's also a letting go and letting my work go where it wants to go, like where it feels like it needs to go. And you know, getting out of the military, there wasn't a big desire in me, sort of Rick, the personality, to go into trauma. That's not.
I know. What were we thinking?
Right. So it's hard for me to sit back and answer that in a way, because I feel like it's a thing that's called me, and it's a thing I'm like trying to honor and to work with, but not necessarily my first choice, and things to like, you know, deeply think about and write about. Because as I was writing this documentary, like, I mean, there's the content is heavy, like the idea of our personality fracturing under the weight of difficult experiences, like that's a heavy idea. And so
I don't know why we're laughing right now.
Because we need to protect ourselves against how heavy the idea is. And so, you know, as I would be, I spent days thinking about this stuff, years. And it's, I don't know where I'm going with this other than to say that I don't know if I chose it. It's something that's chosen me. And it's something that I'm spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to honor that and how to live up to that calling.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I hear you say often is that on our meetings is like, I'm just waiting for the muse to show up. And that's like a hard thing to resolve for me. And I think for a lot of people who have schedules, like this podcast, for example, I published 3 shows over the weekend, and then I won't publish a show for like 6 months. You know, I have no consistency, and I get that there's a middle ground there somehow and somewhere, but I really do like subscribe to the idea of the muse. If I put out something good, it's because it's coming from someplace else. And if I sit down with my mouth agape looking at a blank screen, like I have to do this by Tuesday, I'm never really feeling it very much. So would you like, let's talk about the muse. You know, how do you access her, or what does it feel like when she comes about?
Yeah, you know, it's so funny because Stephen King has a great book called On Writing, where he talks about his life as a writer. And he talks about the idea that, like, we go into creative work in order to, I don't know, we usually go in for like these sort of reasons that we want to fit our creative work into the world, into the cultural context, into profession, into money, into like all the things we have to survive here. And that's part of it. At the same time, as soon as you start to really create, like as soon as you start to explore these unconscious ideas, you start to realize that, like, as he says in On Writing, this idea that writers are finding stories. They're like archaeologists. They're not creating them. And they know that. And you know that as a writer when you find one, because you're like, oh my God, this idea chose me. Holy crap. How can I honor that and distill that and bring that into manifest reality? How can I write that and create that? So really, when we talk about the muse or talk about anything like that, I think what it is a psychological disposition. Are you the one doing it, or are you the one opening to it? And like that is an important first question, right? Because if you're the one doing it, there's no room for the muse. There's no room for the inspiration. But if you're the one opening to it and you don't necessarily know where it's going, then it's a different kind of adventure, I think. But that also, part of the difficulty in that too, like, because I kind of fell out with the script. I mean, I feel it with everything I write, really, is the first book I wrote, or second actually, I sat down, I'm like, I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to write it in 3 months. And this book was like, you're going to write me in 2 years if you die enough and live up to what it means to write me, So there's this idea that, like, one of the reasons I think that we don't operate this way is because it is a letting go of control. We don't know where it's going. There's an idea that the project actually wants something out of us, that the project picked our soul to work with and to commune with and to come into reality through. And so there's an idea that you don't know where it's going. And so you kind of have to let go of control. And I think that scares the hell out of our sort of modern tendencies and predilection to want to have the answer, to know it's going to be done by the deadline. And so when I get into writing projects, it's like almost the first thing I talk about is like, yes, I want to do this. If I want to do it right. Yes, I want to do this. Also, I don't, I work for the muse. She doesn't work for me, and so I have to honor that too and know that. And I think it takes a little while of being in the creative space to realize it will drop. The rest of it will drop. Sometimes there's a single line that, like in the doc, for example, there's a single line and I'm like, what I have there is wrong, and I know it's wrong, but I don't know why. I just know it's not right. And I'll have to go for a walk, and I'll have to smoke a joint, and I'll have to go do yoga, and I'll have to like do all of these different activities that kind of bring me out of my frame or my box at the moment. And then I'll be mowing the lawn and it will fall, and I'll be like, that's it.
Oh,
and so, yeah.
That's great. So the way for you to open to the muse in terms of things to do, or like a practical approach to it, you do yoga, you smoke cannabis, what do those things all have in common? If people don't resonate with those things, what do those things do?
Well, it's interesting because I'm like thinking of like the Homeric hymns, they always start with an invocation to the muse. Like Homer is always like, use me to write this. So it starts with an intention. It starts with the very way you're turning toward the walk. Am I writing this, or am I opening to this? But then the things that I'm mentioning there, they're all things that kind of break our conceptual lens, that break our conceptual framework. We think within very particular paradigms, and those paradigms that we think within are usually utilitarian based because we have to exist here in the world where we have to make money and do all of these things we're talking about. And that's great. But sometimes those frames don't work for opening to the muse, or whatever language you like. It can be the muse language. It can be anything. But the idea that there is a kind of transpersonal other that is speaking to and through you. I think part of what all of those activities have in common is that they're really good at creating divergent thought, of changing the way that you're thinking. So it opens you in a new way would be a way to think about that, I think. And any kind of novel activity will do that.
Yeah, I mean, my process for opening myself to the muse sometimes is as quick as I have this little statue back there of Saint Gabriel, Archangel Gabriel, that I just slam on my desk. It's like, it's this kind of a silly ritual that I have, but it's like a boom, all right, here you go, help me, And then sometimes it's more involved and ceremonial, but it's usually just a slamming down and a silliness of like, be with me right now, like I need you.
It's so interesting that you use that. That you said who is it? Gabriel? Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you know who Henri Corbin is? Have you heard of that name?
No.
Very sophisticated, complicated thinker that I would not recommend looking up on a whim. Because as you read him, you're like, oh, I need like 3 more lifetimes of reading the things he's talking about to know what he's saying, kind of thing.
I'm going to go into full shame spiral before I really acknowledge any of this.
Yes. Anyway, all of that is he has this interesting idea of the angel, and like the angel for him isn't a literal... Actually, if you consider it as a literal thing, you will have killed the angel in his cosmology. At that point, it's just a shell of it's opaque. You can't see through it. But the idea with the angel is that, oh God, I don't even know why I'm describing this because I probably can't. But like all beings have a dark face and a light face. And in the dark face is sort of what you would consider shadow and ignorance. And in the light face is the face that's facing the transcendent, facing possibility and complexity and everything that you could be. But the idea is because the complexity out ahead of you is ignorant to you, you always have an angel in front of you. And an angel always has an angel in front of them. And so there's this idea that cosmology, that the cosmos itself is nested in a way that there's always a being out in front of you to lead you into further complexity, possibility, and potential. And that's his kind of like reading of the angels, which is kind of cool.
Dang. Okay. If you did dumb that down, that was amazing still at a level.
And I might have even misunderstood it.
I was at a get together the other day, and there was a gentleman there who was an atheist, but not like a hardcore atheist, just had never, like, it seemed like he just never really considered what else. He didn't believe in the old man in the sky with the beard. Mm-hmm. And so he was asking me about what I believed, and I was explaining, I'm not going to say explain that, but I explained that, I do work with angels as an example, but I don't see them as winged creatures that are like invisible, but, one's name's Gabriel, and he's like, whatever. The thing about that, though, is this energy and what it represents. And then as I was explaining it, he's like, well, that seems really practical, right? And to me, that brought about kind of like this separation from spirit. He's like, well, that's practical, that doesn't really seem like spiritual or religious. That's like a good, like productive way to think. And then it had me thinking, that's an interesting way that he said that. And I didn't agree with it because I think the personification of these deities and these entities is maybe is more separate from source, or however we want to say it, than seeing them as like what you explained, this energy behind it of inspiration, inspiration that you can tap into as more of an energy source rather than a thing.
Yeah, as an energy source rather than a thing. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting too because there's also a sense that personifying things there's an idea in archetypal psychology, for example, that personifying things allows you to go into them. Mm-hmm. For example, we personify it and we make it an objective thing that's separate from us, and that I think is actually where we go wrong, is we literalize it. Mm-hmm. But there's an idea that like personifying the tree, like if you read a lot of sort of shamanic literature or a lot of pagan literature, like there's an idea that like personifying the tree somehow lets you into its imaginal world, like it sort of connects you with it. It fills in the gap between you and it. But then what happens, I think, is we literalize that and we shove that into our scientific paradigm, and then you have people that are like, well, I don't believe that, like. And so you end up in this place where atheism is a necessity almost to like break you away from the kind of literalism that you've been shoved into.
I love that word, literalism, because that's a word I've been trying to find as I've been having these conversations, because usually the word that pops up is it real? And what is real even then?
And what is real?
Well, so let's talk about psychedelic chaplaincy.
Okay.
does that fit into this conversation? Because I want to talk about it. I don't know what the hell that is, but you're learning about it. And
yeah, well, okay, so I think there's a segue through reality, through this concept of real, what's real. And I think it's this. The question would be, is psyche real? Does psyche have a reality unto itself? And if so, what is the extension of that reality? How real is it? Is it more real than the desk and the things you think are real? Carl Jung makes this point where he says, if I imagine, we'll use the term imagine, because so for us, there's real and there's imaginal, real and fake, and that's the paradigm. It's black and it's white. It's real and it's fake. We work in this way where subject and object are always pitted against each other, right? So Jung has this point where he says, if I imagine that you want to kill me and I kill you instead, that was a reality. We couldn't be like, oh, that's fake. It's real enough that I acted on it. And that you died in the world biologically because of it. So there's this sense that psyche needs to have a reality unto itself for us to actually understand some of the concepts that we're talking about. The entire psychology that I am getting my PhD in and that I study, it's all based on this idea that when you say I, like I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm whatever, right? Most people, I think, when they think about psyche, they think about the I. They think about whatever they can think of in themselves. Like, there's no more to me than I know, right? And that would be, in this psychology, that's ego psychology. Ego actually literally means I. It comes from the Greek and Latin ego, meaning I. So there's this idea that, is there anything more to you than you actually know? And this opens up a bigger context, a bigger conversation, which is things are happening through and to you all the time, and you're combating them. Like, for example, I tell the example I use often, because we tend to think of ourselves as this kind of like unified person, and I want these things and I can go do that. And it's like the person that decides to start working out on January 1st and sets their alarm on December 31st is almost never the person that wakes up at 5 a.m. and shuts the alarm off. They want different things completely, right? So there's all these forces in you that are all competing for life, that all have agency and ideas of their own. And I tend to think what psyche is the totality of all of those things. So we're in psyche, right? As much as we think that psyche is in us, the I, it's in my brain. But in this imaginal sort of psychology, it's like, no, we're in psyche and we're trying to be in right relationship with all of the forces that are acting through, to, and on us, right? And that's the place we start from when trying to understand this. Hopefully, if nobody's been introduced into these ideas for a while or before, it's not too crazy, or like you can follow a little bit of what I'm saying. So, and I say all of that because when we talk about something like psychedelic chaplaincy, right now, and this goes right into what we're talking about with the doc too. Right now, we're in a place where psychedelics are, the road is being paved toward legal psychedelic use, right? And it's definitely happening with MAPS. It's definitely happening with MDA is like the farthest along, I think. But then there's also decriminalization, like here in Denver, like psilocybin has been decriminalized, right? So that's happening. But there's also an idea that capitalism is what carries our rituals in this culture, right? Look at Christmas, look at Halloween, look at our marriage, look at weddings, look at all of our rituals. They're carried by capitalism, and there's this way that you spend money, and there's these things that you have to buy, and there's all this stuff. So what's going to happen is that when you look at like historical psychedelic use in the world in indigenous cultures, it is a ritual. It is a ceremony. There's a space for it. There's a place to do it. So what's going to happen when capitalism carries that ritual forward? Well, what's going to happen is it's going to become a big block retailer, right? Like the Walmarts of the world are going to be pumping psilocybin out into the world, right? So that's like what's getting ready to happen now. Like all these companies are preparing themselves and positioning themselves and buying the permits and like doing the thing. That's what they're going to do, right? At the same time, we have this idea of, so the way it's being legalized is it's being used in conjunction with therapy, right? But part of the therapy it's being used in conjunction with, as far as I can tell, is ego psychology, meaning it's this Western idea that all there is to you is the I. The thing about psychedelics is, once you go down the rabbit hole, you know there is far more to you than the I, right? There's far more to you than you know. And like Jung talks about the ego being a buoy floating in a vast black ocean that extends in every direction and like it's that small compared to psyche. So I think what we need is a psychology that is wide enough and expansive enough and big enough to encompass the imaginal realms that you get catapulted into when you take these things. And I think that behaviorism and ego psychology and all of those things are, I don't want to say they're inadequate to address it, but I think it could be fuller. In my experience, it could be more full. We need more symbolism. We need more of a way to work with these really massive sort of death experiences that happen, right? And when it comes to ego psychology, there's this idea that, people, you come into therapy and I ask you what it is that you want, and then we assume that you actually know. And so now we're going to work toward what it is that you want as if you know. Right. And I struggle with that because I've gotten what I wanted a bunch of times and been completely miserable when I got it. And so it's actually the idea of, again, now we get back to this idea of what is your soul trying to do through you? What is life trying to express through you? This is what psyche is trying to do. And your job is to be conscious of that. Right. So now we're a player in the drama, but we're not commandeering the whole thing. But notice, the moment that happens, we have to let go of this idea of control.
I love that.
Yeah.
Often I will start my journaling practice, and I'll caveat this, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I pull out my journal, and I usually start with, what do I want? And it sends me down a whole path of realizing I have no idea what I want, because what is I? I, at that point, wants success or to be seen or something that I've been cultured to think that I want out of this whatever insecure state that I'm in when I'm journaling at that time. I love that. So how would you define chaplaincy then?
Well, okay. So, and then part of why I'm using the word chaplaincy, and I'm not, I'm still kind of like, I'm working with these ideas still, like there's nothing really final here. But part of why I chose chaplaincy is like, if you look at, this is the other part of that conversation. So there's the therapy conversation, there's the capitalism, but then there's this chaplaincy component too that's being introduced to the psychedelic space. Last time we podcasted together, I think I was in seminary, I'm pretty sure, right?
You were the padre.
Right. So what's interesting about seminary is like, I'm in these counseling classes to be a chaplain. That's what I had felt I was doing, thought I wanted to do. So I'm in these classes and I'm realizing that religion, it's a system of belief. It's a way of thinking about the world. So the way that we help you is by helping you change your belief, the story you're telling yourself. Like the way I can help you, is to get you to come closer to my system of thought where I show you, see, there's a transcendent other and you could also climb this ladder.
Just like a ShamWow commercial.
Right. But I just felt like, but what about the soul? What about the psyche that doesn't give a shit about this belief system or telling itself the right thing? It's suffering and it needs... So anyway, the point is that chaplaincy is kind of a space that was created for clergy members, right? So for pastors, for imams, all these people to move into this space of crisis management, where like hospitals and military and places where you're exposed to the spiritual, not because you chose to, right? You didn't go to church, somebody died or you're dying, right? And so the spiritual all of a sudden became a direct reality for you. It shoved itself into your life. So chaplaincy was created to take people that are like ushering people back and forth across the veil. This would be technically speaking, right? that I have a relationship with spirit, and I've worked hard on that, and so I can help guide you, right, as you kind of journey along that path. But again, it felt inadequate if my concern is the belief system you have and not the actual soul that's in anguish. And so part of why I struggle, or where I've struggled, is I'm looking at all of these chaplaincy programs. I'm trying to find, how do I fit into this personally? And there's something about me that will not accept a belief. Like, I do not think belief is important. It's something we could get into, but like, I do not like the idea of belief. I think it's way overblown in our culture. But this way I could go into those spaces and I could serve the soul. And that's what's important to me, regardless of what you think you're nested within, which, by the way, we don't know anything about. You know? So there's this idea that I could like go into these spaces of crisis and just be with people and be with the soul and see what it wants.
When I went to your house on Christmas to visit with you and Dr. D, so Rick and I think it was just you and I, we took edibles, and then we went with Jeff and Dee to see the Christmas Carol, and it was so fun. Just like amazing.
A production of the Christmas Carol.
Just,
so good.
Yeah, so good. So part of that trip, we were talking about belief, and you and Dee have this, which if you guys listen to the show, you've heard from Dr. Danielle. She just married Rick, or he just married her. The wedding was beautiful. But back before they were husband and wife, you guys used to have these conversations around belief. It's like your trigger word, you know? It's not like,
totally. It like puts me in a place, like it calls Aries out of me. Like it calls this, like it constellates this thing in me that wants to be like, to fight about it.
Yeah, which is such an interesting, like, it's not a belief, but whatever it is that you have. Because, you know, we're creating this documentary where we are raising awareness around post-traumatic growth. We, in a sense, to use the word, like, want people to believe that it's an option, right? And, well, let me get back into that in a second. It seems like it could be counterproductive for someone to have no beliefs, right? Like, on the surface, that seems like, that seems challenging and dangerous, perhaps. Can you speak to that? Like, why might not be true?
Well, can you frame it up again? So, like, you're saying if
it seems counterproductive for somebody to not have any beliefs. I think conventional wisdom tells us to have beliefs is to be a spiritual person. To have beliefs is to be a hopeful, positive, you know, person.
Yeah, and that's true if all we are is intellect, right? So, like, and that's the thing, is that we have this interesting dualism in Western thinking, which splits mind from body, and that all of a sudden the body becomes this object upon which we as subjects force our will upon, essentially. And then we treat the body like a machine, and it comes out in all of our, you know, our fitness, it comes out in everything, right? But what the other way it comes out, and this is coming off of Descartes and the Enlightenment, is like, you know, this person is, Descartes really wants to explore philosophy, but he lives in a system at which there is no philosophy outside of the church, right? So he comes up with this split that allows him to say, oh, but notice, I'm not studying that. I'm studying... He starts to divide things and split. And this is what reductionism and reason does. We start to divide things. But then what happens is that religion, trying to keep up with the Enlightenment, also buys into this division. And now we have a place where what it means to be religious is completely intellectual. And so so if you're religious, it's what you believe. Right? So now we're saying the story you tell yourself is what makes you religious, right? And then what happens is, people that know more, the clergy, your parents, they say to be religious is to tell yourself this story. And so if you tell yourself a different story, you're not religious. But it turns out that I think we have a religious function of the psyche, meaning there's a part of us that must express itself that must be connected to more. That inherently knows that when you were a child, there wasn't a division. There wasn't a difference between God and the bugs that you held in your hand, right? That you were in it. You were with the gods. But something happens as you get indoctrinated into this culture, which is you start to split. This mind and body thing start to move apart. If you went to, so to get into seminary, I have to sign a statement of belief. So I have to say, I tell myself this story based on these bullet points. Doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what ritual I participate in. It doesn't. So religion for us is only what you believe. And this is why I've been writing this Psychology of Embodied Religion. Because if you were to go to Tibet, for example, and talk about, like, there's a rich intellectual culture of debate in Tibetan Buddhism, where you go into monastery, it's like going into a university where you have levels and you debate your way up. Like, you actually are like, so you're using reason. Reason is strong. But there's not a religion outside of what you do, about how you show up in the world. That wouldn't even make sense about how you are. But for us, you'll notice, like, it's almost it's become a trope. Like, the Catholic person does this on Saturday night and this on Sunday morning. Like, it's actually a thing we like that has become a meme in our culture. And so what I'm getting at is we have overemphasized this intellectual aspect of our being to think that that's the linchpin that actually connects us to the more. And what I'm saying is, and then we combine that with all of our, like, ascensionist mythologies, which are up and out, right? So now you believe, you tell yourself the right story, and you get to leave. You get to escape the mess of human life, right? And I think our religions, I think even our secular scientific pursuits, they're all really funneling us in this direction, which is up into the intellect, and from the intellect, it's up into a disembodied heaven, or into the internet, into the metaverse, into something that's not an embodied, that isn't our actual physical existence here on this earth. And so part of what my work has been is trying to rediscover the importance of working through our aversion to descent into the body. Because I think that the story you tell yourself, it's not that it has nothing, that it's not important at all. Of course it is. But it's a matter of emphasis. And if that's what makes you religious, now we have these people who, rather than have a connection to their own religious instinct, are like, well, I don't believe that story. That sounds stupid. I'm not going to believe that. So now I don't have a connection to spirit. So what I do instead is I go get hammered on Friday night. I escape into what we literally call spirits because I don't have a connection with the spiritual realm, or something along those lines, right? I think we end up in this place where what we're yearning for is this full embodied relational way of being in the world, and but the model we're given is shoving us up into the intellect, and it's creating these compulsions and these fixations to try to find the things that the psyche naturally wants, but to find them in ways that aren't embodied, and it's splitting us further. It's leading us further away from ourselves. Mm. I have no idea if that's what you asked me, but that's where I went with it.
Doesn't matter. It was great. Okay. In the last panel that we did on the documentary, which is on post-traumatic growth, you had mentioned that you actually have a problem with the word growth. I agree with that. I think at this point we all do. Like, knowing what we know now, it is unfortunate that that's the word we have to work with, because it's the scientific name that we're bringing to a concept that's fantastic. But you'd said that you prefer it to be like a post-traumatic deepening. Mm-hmm. And I had recently published the full interview that you and Luke we flew to Devon to go see Richard Rudd, and I listened to that whole thing, published that on the channel the other day. And he also talked about this deepening, as awakening is deepening. So I would love if you could touch on, and this transitions us a little bit into the documentary talk here. You and I come from a realm of personal development, right? Lots of different words for that, self-help, all those things, starting off in fitness like a lot of us do. And then we found ourselves at a point where we realized that personal development doesn't look exactly how we thought it did, and how a lot of people in this industry, for lack of a better word, will describe it, right? Like, I think that a common thing that I see in personal development, like podcasts and YouTube channels and teachers and whatnot, is how to make more money, how to find your soulmate, or how to date better, and how to, like, basically be healthier, right? All those things are great. Like, we all want those things. But what are the things that are missing? What are the things that actually happen when you deepen, when you grow for real?
Yeah, mystery and soul is what's coming to me, right? Because all of those things assume that you know what you want, Like, and that's, we started out talking about that, interestingly enough. I think that the way I tend to describe it in a sort of quick kind of snippet way is personal development is I know that I want something, and there are people who understand what habits and implementations and tools I need in order to get that thing. So I start a morning routine or something because I think that that's going to give me the thing I think I actually want, which is productivity or whatever, right? So personal development starts with this idea that I know what I want and I need to find the right tools in order to get the right technology in order to get me there. I think there's a place for that too, actually, because sometimes I need to make more money, or something. Like I need something and we have tools for that. Great. But that's not transformational work, and that's transformational work is far closer to impersonal development, right? You're developing the impersonal in you. Again, the question is, what's trying to live through you? Like I talk to people because I coach and I work with people sort of in this kind of style constantly. And there's all of these times where our model of development puts us in a place when you start to transform, you don't know where you're going. And so there's always these places in transformational work where people feel that they get there's a sense of I'm losing control and I'm lost and I don't know where I am. And the answer, if you're in personal development, is, well, you need a new technology, tool, trick, hack to move you along in the right place. But what if being lost is the medicine, right? What if you've spent your whole life knowing where you're supposed to be and it's left you completely miserable? And so right now you need to develop your capacity to be lost. Because only when you're lost will you be humble enough for the soul to actually start living through you, right? Or will you be open enough? So there's this idea that it's a different orientation toward the work. And I try not to be in a place where I want to pit one against the other, but there's something I'm concerned with, and it's not the development of the person. It's the impersonal development that's interesting to me, that makes room for mystery, that allows us to be on the adventure. We don't know where it's going. That's an adventure. And that's what our life has called us to, really, in my estimation. And so when we look at that against trauma work, we can do the same thing. The fantasy that we have about reality determines how we see its contents. And what that means is, like, if we might see an obstacle where the gods have actually placed a lever, but the fantasy that we're existing within is looking at it as an obstacle. So like if for example, I have this Christian mythology, and this is where this really matters. If I have this Christian mythology that there's a good, and that I know the definition of that good, which is, and then I'm moving toward it, well, and then something bad happens to me, the only value that thing happening to me is the value it provides for me to get closer to the good, right? And so then we start to see our traumatic and our fracturing experiences as something negative that we need to move through or get past or escape out of because they don't have any value in themselves, right? The value is all, where is the good that I'm going to? It's the heaven I'm going to get to. There's no value in the actual messy human thing I'm going through in this moment. And I say, well, what if we turn that, and I say, I'm working with a lot of thinkers that are much smarter than me, but like, what if we turn that completely upside down and completely backwards, and we say, no, being lost is the medicine? What would that mean? How might that change our entire fantasy about what we're doing here? And I think if we start to let in mystery, again, that sense of adventure and aliveness has room to start coming into.
I so resonate with that. In this season of life where I'm alone a lot of the time, which, by the way, I have 2 cats coming tomorrow. I can't wait to send you pictures. So I'm not like totally alone, but I feel like I'm going crazy. Like I was just texting somebody this morning. I feel like I'm going insane, sitting with my thoughts constantly, not distracting myself, and letting this lost feeling be the thing that I need is a constant check-in that I have to have with myself at this moment. This idea that I'm like feeling like I'm faced with my own mortality or something. Like there's something about death that's creeping along. If I don't see another human face that day, did I even exist that day? You know, these are these weird thoughts that are coming into my mind. And I just heard somebody cough this morning. Like I didn't realize how thin my walls are here in this apartment. My neighbors are so quiet. So I had this like also realization that like everybody's hearing me talking out loud about these insane things.
Yes.
So that sucks. But yeah, like this, but that reminder there, and thank goodness I have friends like you and Dee and Jeff and people that we get to talk about these things too. So I know I'm not going crazy. Like this is the exact lever that some hilarious, you know, energy has put into my path to pull with my teeth, you know, like the only thing that I have available to me while I feel like my hands are tied behind my back in terms of like how my life is going. Like, how is it going? What a crazy question that feels like these days. I don't know.
Totally.
Like it's progressing. The days are going on, and yet I have no idea where I'm going. And also explaining that is exactly where I need to be right now doesn't make a lot of sense to people.
Yeah, well, and we're also convinced of our beliefs that we actually should know where we're going and that we do. And so if you say that, and like if somebody says, hey, how are you doing? And you're like, well, I don't know. And like you just explain what you explained. There's also a sense that very few people can be with that because they've not been with that in themselves, right? Most people are, I was looking for good but busy. I wasn't looking for what you're actually.
When I don't want to
totally.
Get into it.
Well, that's the thing is that there isn't a lot of space for it. And I think when you talk about the why of the conversation, like why are we building this documentary? Because this is what life's actually like. And it is, if there is in it, we have the right to speak about it. If there is an inalienable human right, it is for us to speak of the possibilities that we have. And I think that that's a huge driving factor of this. Like, we can have a conversation in terms of this fantasy of like, oh, it's tough, but I know it's so that I can get to this better thing. It's, you know, if we are like obligated to speak in terms of cultural fantasy, it kind of puts our soul on life support, I think. You know, like and we're sitting there like our soul's like, oh, I'm good. I'm like barely, you know, I've been shoved in a box since I was 8. I'm like barely hanging on, and we're like good but busy. We're like trying to stay above it all and like crushing coffee. And it's like, I think we should dissent. I think we have the capacity to be with each other in an embodied way and have real conversations about what it means for the soul to be in anguish and to stir and to live a human life.
So I need to create a meme about that. That was funny. So we've been writing and working on this for years now. And have you figured out what the documentary is about?
Not in a way that like an explanation would satisfy.
It's the craziest thing, huh? It's like I could recite your writing forwards and backwards. I could tell you every single clip. I can tell you the way it makes me feel. I can tell you the kind of like outcome that I want from it. But what is it about is...
Do you think that part of the point of the documentary, though, is what you just said, like how it makes you feel? That actually, like, whatever... First of all, I think a lot of times feelings are inarticulate at first, but like in whatever way it stirs you, like is the point that that it's supposed to stir you in a particular way, not so that you can, again, because this is the other thing with belief, it's all wound up in what we can say. It's wound up in the intellect and what we can voice and articulate. But there's something in this documentary that I felt from writing it and from listening to it. And even, you know, having a client came to that first screening and he was talking to me about it after. And like the way it sort of like he experienced a kind of opening toward possibility, or he described it as eye-opening, which is, I really, like, I think that's interesting because there's a lot of imagery of opening in this. So I don't know that he could tell me what it's about, but something in him did know. Like, the thing that can't articulate it did understand it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, actually, watching the short film has me feeling the same kind of way as when I watch an Attenborough nature documentary. Like, I don't know what it's about. It's about, like, eagles or something and, like, a whole bunch of other animals. But it's about, like, but I feel like good. I feel hopeful. I feel like I understand something in the way I didn't before.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes. It like puts you together in a way you can't really articulate.
And
Yeah.
also, maybe a different example would be you look at Hubble telescope pictures. I feel a similar way when I look into space, where I'm not understanding anything really, or the documentary does teach you things, but from this feeling sense, there's something I understand on a soul level looking out into space that when I'm in my four walls and I'm feeling boxed in and overwhelmed, that I don't understand. Even though all of this makes more sense than space, which to me is completely unknowable and I don't get it. But that there's more understanding with that energy than in my apartment, for example.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm just because, one definition of God I rather like is by definition that which you don't understand. And so as you sit there and you look up into space, which you just described as, I don't get it. I don't know what's happening. I don't. I mean, even think about the fact that actually you're looking down into space, not up. It's just up to you. Right. But anyway, so there's this idea that like you just put your body in the mystery and that does something to you. Right. That's like this idea of embodied religion that I'm like writing about. It's like there's something that happens. It's beyond belief. It's beyond the stories we tell ourselves when our body comes into communion with the mystery that does something to us. And interestingly is I think that there's this idea of illuminationism that actually like reading and writing and literature and hopefully watching a doc can trigger an experience like that. It's an embodied relational way of being with the material that opens you in a way that's not definable, but that is certainly important.
Ooh, that's a good pitch. As I'm working through more the business aspect of this documentary, these are conversations that I need to distill into like a log line and, what do investors want to see, which is this whole thing. But these are the conversations I really like to have. So
yeah. Luke was asking me for a log line for the longest time, and it just like it was like killing me to try to put this into a line.
Yeah, we're still working on it.
It's gotta be done, but yeah.
Okay, so to wrap us up here, I would like to talk about your process in going to hell and back with the writing of this. We basically presented a theory. We shared with you all the interviews that we did, but you had this enormous task of narrating this, and kind of like the Attenborough thing. I have described the feeling sense of this documentary as a nature documentary, just with people instead of animals. So there's this overall narrative that we're looking to tell, that we do tell, and then there are certain characters or animals that will come in to show that narrative through real experiences. But that overarching storyline is so beautiful. And I know that you really wrestled with it. So what was that process like for you?
What was really helpful is as Luke was building the doc, as he was building the imagery and the story, him and I met like essentially weekly for quite a while and like would fight each other over the ideas, like really wrestle over them. And I would be trying to prove him wrong and he would be trying to we were like really, that was such looking back, that was such an important phase of the work. Partly because for me, writing is, I have to hold ideas in my head loosely for months and I just think about them and I can't make them anything because I don't know what the hell they are. But over time of wrestling with them, they'll start to become something. There's a gestation period, before birth. And so there's this idea that that aided in that for sure. So us meeting and talking about it. So I had gotten that idea of ruminating on this story for a solid year before I wrote a single word, which was so important to the process itself. Was that your question about process?
Yeah. And then so as we're finishing up now your narration, I think it's practically done. I mean, who knows? We're going to go through more edits and you'll probably come back to it. But after you added that last bit around, it just really ended on a whole note. And I don't exactly remember what the lines were, but something around the work that we've left the politicians to our government agencies, to big corporations to do is ours to do, and that's where it begins. How did you feel when you wrote that line? Because when I read it or when I heard it, I was like, I just wanted to set my house on fire. It was so good.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think what I did is then as the writing commenced, I would write, but then I would I'm pretty good at being a devil's advocate. Like I don't really need to actually hold the viewpoint I argue for, like at all. I just kind of like to play with ideas in that way.
Wow, you must be a really difficult husband.
It's taken some getting used to. And sometimes, okay, so this is actually good that you say that. Because I would like, and that's what sent me to hell. It's like, I could prove that wrong. I could prove that. That's not right. I could. And so I'm like, that process was very, very, to say something that was like not a straw man, that I feel like, okay, I could put this on a hill and I could go for it, because it stood the test of my own, like trying everything I could to knock it down. So there was that process. But then the final narration was interesting because we had written the whole thing. The final, we had a while, and like I had a while to sit with the final narration, and it wasn't coming. It wasn't dropping. And I would sit there writing like, I know I say that you don't work for me, but could you fucking help? You know, like I'm like, really? Like I'm starting to get like, oh, I need to trust that this is going to happen, but it's not happening now. And then finally, the moment struck, and this is another thing that Stephen King talks about. He's like, I don't know the exact quote, but it's something like, I don't know if the muse is going to show up that day, but from 9 to 5 every day, she'll know where I'm going to be. So that and so that's kind of what I do. Is I sit down and write every morning, whether or not the muse is there or not. Anyway, one morning it did start to come. And I was enthused. Like it was, something gripped me, and I wrote this thing out, and I was like so I'm by myself though, and I'm in my room, and I'm like giving it, and I'm just like, oh, this is fire, it's like, I'm giving it. And then I was like, Danielle, can you listen to this? And I read it to her, and it was just like, huh? Like she kind of was like, well, I think it would be a good talk, but I don't know if it's a good script. Ripped all of the enthusiasm out. And then I was like, I can't, that sent me into like, I don't know how to write a script. Like, what am I doing? Yeah. Got to a point though, where I'm like, well, what would you change? And then she starts, and then I start to defend, and then she starts to shut down. And then I'm like, listen, I need you to fight me on this. Like, I need this, right? The work needs this, like suspend, like just like really, let's go. I need this. And to her credit, I feel like for 2 hours, like we wrestled over it so hard, and then it ended in a place where I was like, okay, I think it's good now. I think it is actually okay now.
That's so great. So we need to give Dr. Danielle a writer wrangler credit, like an animal wrangler or something, like the writer wrangler credit in the film. That's such a good story. Totally.
Because I'm like, babe, I'm not fighting you on this. Like, we need to fight over these ideas. Like, I'm needing this reflection right now, So, like, and that's hard to get, is to get, like, good, honest reflection in that way. So it was a huge help, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I mean, are you still doing your show? Like, are you in your cave now? Where can people find you, or can they not find you?
Yeah. Another thing, this is what I was going to say at the beginning of the show. You were like, oh, I already released 3 shows this week, but now I won't for 6 weeks. That's actually kind of like, there's a rhythm to like when the muse does speak to me, when I can create and when I can't. And like, sometimes I'm realizing I have to be okay with that. I'm locked in my house with a bunch of philosophy books and I'm not coming out for 9 months, and I'm sorry. But just letting that be the case instead of being like, nope, if you have a podcast, you have to publish every Thursday because that's how you get listeners. And if you get listeners, that whole story that we tell ourselves, like letting that go has been really important for me, because that's just not how it happens. Like, I could produce something every week, but it's not going to be good. And so, interestingly, coinciding with this documentary coming out, I actually feel like I'm not forcing it, but I'm like, oh, I'm ready to start having sort of public conversation and stuff. So my podcast is coming back.
Awesome.
In a somewhat modified form, but it's coming back, and rickalexander.com is where I put everything.
Great. You have 2 books people can purchase at any time through your website, through Amazon, and then your podcast, which you're not actively adding to right now, but has an entire backlog of really remarkable content. Don't say otherwise, because I know how you are about your past work. It's so good, you guys. Check that out. It's 1,000 Names for God.
Yeah.
Okay, Rick, you're the best. I want to talk to you every day.
Thanks. It's a great conversation. I appreciate it. I hope it was at least somewhat like followable for people.
Of course, yeah. I mean, so the thing about you is you talk from the heart, and you have a brain that can beef up the feeling sense of what you're trying to communicate, and those two things are really helpful. I don't think there's anything else you could add to that. And life experience. You know, you have quite an extensive life experience, which we didn't even touch on today, but I'll probably add that in the intro. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on. I love you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, love you too. Thanks.